Oklahoma gives Brent Venables a big extension. I don't get it.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, as the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. That is John Williams of Locked On Sooners, whose head coach has now been given an extension and a raise before he has ever coached a game in the SEC, a conference in which someone or some group of people, fans, are not going to be happy as it pertains to the playoff. We'll talk about that and a recruiting buzz in the not so good realm for USC and in the good realm for Memphis. Yeah, we're going to get to all that today. But I want to start with Brent Venables here, John, because I was more than a little surprised that the extension was announced. It added a couple of years onto his contract. It raised his base salary. And it's not that I don't think Brent Venables is a decent coach. I just haven't seen enough in 2 years to make me think this is a long-term commitment that needed to happen right now. Because who was going to poach Brent Venables? The most likely case would be Clemson. And by the way, I don't even know that that's likely since they're not in the SEC or the Big Ten. And Oklahoma now is. So I don't think he was in danger of being poached. I think the results were good last year, but they were certainly not good the year before. He'd inherited a tougher situation, to be fair. But this is a guy who hasn't coached a single game against the SEC. I haven't seen enough yet, and I think this is an incredibly risky move for Oklahoma financially, because what if he loses, 7-8 games in the next couple of years? Aren't there going to be calls for his job if that comes to pass?
I mean, I think there's a real possibility that he can lose 6 to 7 games over the next couple of years. I mean, I think a 3-loss season this year is potentially in the cards, but I don't necessarily think that is a slight against Brent Venables. I think that's a reality of the schedule that they're looking at. I've said that the absolute floor for this team is 8-4, despite what the schedule looks like. This is a team that should be playoff contention as they enter the month of November. Now, how games against Alabama, LSU, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, how those games go is going to define what this season looks like. Texas, throw Texas in there every year. That's going to define how this season goes for the Oklahoma Sooners. But I don't necessarily think, even if they finish 8-4, 7-5, I don't think that is necessarily a slight against Brent Venables. It's a program that's still being built. It's a depth chart that had very little depth when he took over. And it's a roster that he's had to overhaul in a couple of years' time. And he's had 3 top 10 recruiting classes in that time that's added that depth. It's getting there. It's not quite where he wants it to be just yet, but it's on the way. And I think there's a lot of optimism about what Brent Venables is building from a cultural standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. I think the 10-win season last year showed that this is a program that is on the right track. Now, will they go make the playoff this year? Will they contend for an SEC title? We'll see. But to me, this just says, hey, Brent Venables was our guy when we hired him back in the December of 2021. He's still our guy today. Anybody that has any thought or question about putting him on the hot seat with how 2024 goes, just scratch that thought from your memory. It's going to be Brent Venables' team for the long haul.
I think with this schedule, you have to say 9-3 would be outstanding. You mentioned the games, but these are all on Oklahoma's schedule this year. Hosting Tennessee, that's not going to be easy. In a battle of talented young quarterbacks, Nico Iamaleava and Jackson Arnold. They have to go at Auburn. That's a difficult place to win. Then they play Texas in the Red River Showdown. That's 3 consecutive weeks, by the way, with a bye before the Red River game. They go at Ole Miss. That's one of the toughest games you can play in the SEC this year. They have to go at Missouri, which is just not an easy place to go. They have to go at LSU and host Alabama. So I'm with you that the hot seat talk can't arise after this year. That schedule is just absolutely brutal. It's a gauntlet. It is a bona fide the epitome of brutality from a scheduling standpoint, to steal a phrase from John Rothstein, who covers college basketball in a great way. But next year, if you've gone, I know the schedule's hard this year. If it's 8-4 this year, and he backs up with 8-4 again next year, do you not think there would be any sense of pressure, or that regret could creep in about, did we really need to extend him? Because again, I'm curious, what was your first reaction when you saw the news that he was extended? Was it positive? Was it neutral? Surprise? What was it?
It was positive, and ultimately is positive because you add 2 more years to a deal that you believe, for a guy that you believe in. You know, this is a guy that he's an Oklahoma guy. I mean, you go back to 1999, 1998, when he came in with Bob Stoops as his defensive coordinator. It's an Oklahoma guy. He was the right guy they needed to hire when they brought him in after Lincoln Riley left, and he has stabilized the program. I mean, when Lincoln Riley left, they had a top 10 recruiting class with Riley, that 2021 going into the 2022 signing class, and then it just fell apart. Well, Venables and his staff rebuilt it, and they've had back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes in full recruiting cycles, and they look like they're going to have another one this cycle. They're building a defense. I mean, this is a roster that's being built holistically. I know Lincoln Riley believed that going to USC, he was going to have a chance to build a better roster than what he was able to do at Oklahoma. But Brent Venables is showing that, hey, I can build a more holistic roster than what was being built during the Lincoln Riley era. And the offensive talent has not dropped off. The defensive talent is better than what it was. I mean, that 2024 signing class with David Stone and Jaden Jackson and Nigel Smith, a group of 4-star, 5-star defensive linemen that are going to radically change what this defense looks like over the next couple of years. There's a lot of reason for optimism. I mean, that group is the freshman class this year. Okay, they're going to be sophomores next year. So yes, we want to see the results this year. We want to see the results next year. But I think there's still going to be a little bit of patience because we know that, hey, Brent Venables' full, recruiting defensive class is that 2024 signing class. And as they become juniors, that's going to be the year that, hey, there's not really going to be any excuses. And the buyout increases, but the base salary only increases by like $400,000. Yes, it's an increase and it's a large increase, but I think what it shows is, hey, anybody that's got any question about Brent Venables, just squash it. He's our guy now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And Joe Castiglione has proven to be a very patient athletic director as well.
Do you think that that's why they made the move? Because they wanted to project to their fans that we're committed to this guy? Like, what do you think was the reasoning behind this when you've seen 2 seasons and you know that he's going to be your head coach because the contract was locked up? And I don't think, their salary didn't go up a bunch. It's not like he was dramatically underpaid or anything like that relative to what, Oklahoma's done the last couple of years. Why do you think this was the right time?
Well, they're going into the SEC. You have a head coach now that, he ranks like 8th or 9th in salary in the SEC, but they also gave raises to their gymnastics coach, their women's basketball coach, Jenny Baranczyk.
I hope Patty Gasso's getting a raise.
Well, Patty Gasso, KJ Kindler, who's the women's gymnastic coach, they're 2 of the very best in their respective sports and maybe in college sports in general. But Jenny Baranczyk, who's a very highly thought of women's basketball coach, she hasn't been out of the round of 32 yet. And she got a raise that put her up over $1 million. So Oklahoma's athletic department and the Board of Regents is, hey, we're going to the SEC. We're going to invest and we're going to show that we are ready to make the necessary investments, not just in football, but across the board, to show not only our fans, but SEC fans, prospects, families, that we are invested to making sure Oklahoma athletics is at the very top and the very pinnacle of SEC competition.
John Williams, Locked On Sooners. Catch him on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. John, appreciate the discussion as always.
Yeah, my pleasure, Spencer.
Speaking of the SEC, major fan bases, perhaps multiple, but at least one, are going to be really unhappy at the end of this season. The question is who? We'll talk about that next. Before we talk SEC, we're talking FanDuel. I love sports, if that wasn't obvious. College football especially, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets quite literally anytime I'm in the mood. This particularly applies to college football. We're going to be talking about the playoff odds that certain teams have coming up next. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start making the most out of your summer. You can bet everything you want for college football, win totals, make the playoff, miss the playoff, conference championship odds, national championship odds, Heisman odds. It's all over there. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So in the SEC this year, everyone can't make the playoffs. See, that sounds like a really obvious statement, but you have to conceptualize what that means. There are going to be multiple, as in more than one. Several probably means more than two, I would think, in the dictionary. Maybe, possibly. That's how I'm going to use it here. Fan bases that have playoff hopes or expectations this year. And a lot of them are going to come up short, and they're going to be supremely disappointed. This is a question that popped into my mind. Who are those teams going to be? Because here are the teams in the SEC that I think have a reasonable or outside chance that might be slim, but is still technically possible of making the playoff. Georgia, Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri. Those are the teams that I think have a really good shot of getting there for various reasons. Texas A&M and Oklahoma, I think, are outside looking in, and Auburn, Florida would be complete and total wild cards. I don't really put them in the mix there. So let's focus on those 2, 4, 6, 8 teams. How many teams is the SEC going to get in the playoff? The maximum, I think, is 5. The minimum, I think, is 3. So let's say the number is 4. Let's say that number is 4. Georgia's going to be one of those teams. Okay, so now we're down to 3. We've got 3 spots for SEC teams left. Texas is the next odds betting favorite, according to our friends at FanDuel, at minus 230. They are the last team that's greater than minus 200, along with Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State, to make the playoff in the first place. And then you go down the list, and suddenly, let's say Texas makes it, just for the sake of argument here, and Texas has got a challenging schedule, to be sure. If they win that game week 2 at Michigan, Texas's odds of getting to the playoff are pretty darn good. They're pretty darn good, because I think that'll end up being a very quality win. And if they go through 10-2, 11-1, boom, into the playoff, whether or not they win the SEC championship game. An interesting scenario to think about, just as a quick sidebar. What if a team goes 10-2 in the SEC and one of their losses is just okay, and then they lose the SEC championship game and they're 10-3? Yeah, this 12-team playoff is going to generate all sorts of fun debates, as is always the case. But that means between Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri. Oh, no, I didn't forget about you, LSU. I was just playing a little game. I'm just messing around. Relax. Calm down, comment section. So LSU is in the mix. They're not going to be a lock to get there. They have one of the best offensive lines in the SEC, maybe in all of college football, with a couple of first-round caliber tackles, but you got to change a quarterback. You got some turnover at wide receiver from last year's team. I don't know. I'm not saying they can't do it, but do I feel like they're as close to a lock as a Georgia or a Texas? No, not really. So if you're listening to or watching the show and you're a fan of one of these teams, just know there is a distinct possibility that your team's not going to make the playoff this year. And you got to be prepared for that possibility. Now, I don't know at this time whom I would predict to miss the playoff. I don't know if I love LSU or Oklahoma. Oklahoma's schedule, that's a little bit too tough. Texas A&M, year 1, I think that's asking a little bit too much. So then you come down to Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Bama, who I would have going for 2 spots, and LSU as well. Only 2. If I'm picking 2 spots there, I'm taking Ole Miss for 1, and I come down on the next 2 to Alabama and Missouri. Spencer, why would you come down to those 2? Missouri has among the most workable schedules in the entire SEC, and Alabama, as I have talked about recently on the show, has this guy as their head coach. His name is Kalen DeBoer. He is exceptionally good at the coaching thing. His career coaching record at various levels is about 10 wins for every 1 loss. And he's at Alabama now. This is going to be probably the worst Alabama team. Look at the way he's recruiting. Pretty darn good, especially for a guy who had recruiting questions, which I think were fair. He's answering them right now. This is going to be the worst Alabama team, and they still might wind up in the playoff. they still might end up getting there. Getting to the SEC championship game for one of these teams could be exceedingly difficult. Exceedingly difficult. Because you could have tiebreakers, you could have same right. If you told me all those teams go 10-2, yeah. Or if they're in that sort of range, yeah, I could absolutely see it. But does a 9-3 SEC team get in? Think about Oklahoma for a moment. They have games against Ole Miss on the road, LSU on the road. We're not done with the road games yet. They've got to go at Auburn. They've got to play Tennessee, and they've got to play Alabama. And oh, by the way, they have to play Texas. If they go 500 in those games, which I don't think they will, if they go 500 in those games, they're 3-3. Is that getting into the playoff? What does that 9-3 Oklahoma team with that resume look like? Let's say they have a win against Texas and Tennessee and LSU, but they lose to Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn. Let's say that's how their schedule shakes out. What do you do? What do you do with that team? This is the conundrum that the committee is going to find themselves in. Before, it was far more clear-cut. You could go on number of losses, and strength of record matters, but now it matters even more. And this is just a gauntlet of teams. SEC, best conference in college football, no arguments here. If you make that case, I'm going to stand right behind you, and I will support that particular case. But when I look at these teams, you're going to have some really disappointed, upset fan base. Can you imagine? What if Ole Miss doesn't make the playoff? What if Brian Kelly has coached for 3 years at LSU and doesn't have a single playoff appearance? Then what? We'll talk with Caroline Fenton of Locked On LSU later this week about, what that might actually look like there. I think his job is secure the contract as long, and I don't think he's going to just, lose at a high level all of a sudden. But how do things start to feel in Baton Rouge? Does he go on the warm seat for 2025? What about Lane Kiffin? This is going to be the most hyped season of Ole Miss football this year. They are a favorite. Do you know how many teams are a favorite, as in minus odds, to make the playoff? Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ole Miss, Michigan. Michigan? How about that? That's not one that I would pick. But 8 teams, 8 schools that FanDuel says, you have minus odds to make the playoff. Now, I think Alabama is undervalued in that group. But this is going to be one of the most fascinating components of the SEC season. And yeah, they could get a 5th team into that playoff. You'd still wind up with coaches who have to answer big questions, with fans who are going to look around and go, what on earth is happening here? How did we not get into the 12-team playoff? They expanded the field. It's easier to get there. How did we not get in? I will again read you this list. Georgia, Texas, Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. I think 5 is the max, but 4 is probably the right number. 4 of those teams, only 4, are getting into the college football playoff. Just something to think about. Just something to think of. It's just a little Monday food for thought. That's all that is. Some Monday food for thought about how the SEC is going to play out, because it's going to be utterly fascinating to see who misses the playoff, how they miss the playoff, and what the reaction is to them missing the playoff. Because before not making the playoff, Kirby Smart missed the playoff last year. Did anybody bat an eye and say it wasn't a good season? No, it wasn't the season they were fully capable of. They were still really, really good. Different standard now, different expectations. It's one of the things that I think is interesting. Not necessarily that I like, but is interesting about the 12-team playoff. Something else I find interesting. USC had been cooking on the recruiting trail. Well, that momentum might have slowed a little bit. And did you see what Memphis did? Memphis? Yeah, we got to talk about those 2 things on the trail coming up next. First, we got to talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want. That's an important tandem right there, like a quarterback and a wide receiver. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So over the last several months, USC's recruiting buzz has been very positive because they were looking like they were going to get a top 10 class. They were recruiting big-time prospects on the defensive side of the ball. And in the last week, they've had two pretty major decommitments on the defensive line. Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson, 5-star defensive linemen, both from the state of Georgia. Not long ago, I was talking about USC and the way they're recruiting in 2025, and Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider here at the network, said that USC was going to have an incredibly tough time keeping those guys committed. Well, there were a select few USC fans that weren't thrilled with that particular assessment. I'm sure you will all offer Brian your deepest and humblest apologies at this time. That is, of course, incredibly sarcastic. I don't expect you to do that, and neither does Brian for that matter. But pulling guys out of Kirby's backyard is incredibly difficult. I think it speaks volumes that D'Anton Lynn, their new defensive coordinator, even had them committed in the first place. These are guys Kirby normally wouldn't have let out of his sight nowadays. Georgia has the best program in college football. Kirby is probably the best coach in the country right now. How did they even get to USC in the first place? Well, you got it. I respect USC for making the effort. Unfortunately for them, they couldn't close the deal. Both guys have got crystal balls to Georgia and will probably be a part of a great Bulldogs defense one day. Now, USC's 2025 recruiting class is still inside the top 20, so it is not cratered into oblivion and things are looking bleak and whatnot. The bulk of recruiting classes are going to be made up by the time the season starts, particularly in the next kind of 5-6 weeks or so. By the end of July, early August, you'll get some commitments that will trickle in as well. But what I'm looking for USC is, now that you've lost these two guys who were linchpin defensive recruits of their 2025 class, they still have blue chip players on that side of the ball, which is important. How do they replace them? Who do they go after? Who are they going to be able to get? Are they going to get developmental prospects? Are they going to get guys that are fringe starters, really more rotation guys? Or are they going to go back to the well and try to get some other big-time defensive linemen? I don't know. But it's not all negative on the recruiting front, because those commitments definitely caught my eye. Not just because Brian had mentioned them to me before, but because they were players that you just didn't think USC ordinarily would get when Lincoln Riley's the head coach. When Pete Carroll was the head coach, sure. But now when Lincoln Riley is the head coach over there, again, speaks volumes to that defensive coordinator hire that I really like. D'Anton Lynn, get to know the name. He's a big player in the Big Ten this year. If he does what I think he's capable of, USC is a Big Ten championship contender. I completely feel that way. I don't have any concerns about their offense. I might have more questions about their quarterback than any other position on the field, maybe their offensive line. But it's Lincoln Riley. They're going to score plenty of points. Can they stop anybody? We are going to find out. So I think for USC, it's not all bad news, because they still got Juju Lewis. And that's another guy who I've talked about before here on the show. He's number one quarterback in the class of 2025. He's going to the guy that generates Heisman Trophy winners and first-round picks like a fourth-grade teacher generates fifth graders. I mean, this is just an expectation at this point for Lincoln Riley. So I think still having him when other schools have made such a big push, that's a notable development as we work into the final week of the month of June. Because that's where we're at. Believe it or not, check your calendars. Last I checked, the show is airing on the 24th of June, 2024. That's closer to the end than the beginning. Is there more work to be done to keep Juju Lewis? Yep, I absolutely believe that is the case. Other schools are going to continue to come after him. But just keep watching what USC does on the recruiting trail. Because the narrative around Lincoln Riley is overwhelmingly negative. I'm not someone who is particularly negative on Lincoln Riley, because I think he had a bad season last year. He finally got rid of Alex Grinch. If he'd done it before the year, I think USC is a lot better than 8-5 by the time that year comes to a close. I think they have another double-digit win season. Maybe they would have been 9-3 instead of 7-5. That still would have felt a lot better and a lot different, at the very least, down there in Los Angeles, and the national narrative would be different than it is right now. He had a blind spot. It was Alex Grinch, and he got rid of him. He finally made the change. And now they have to progress, and they have to make the changes that USC fans should want them to make in order to be a perennial college football playoff contender. And if D'Anton Lynn is at the very least better with the scheme than Alex Grinch was, which, gosh almighty, how could you possibly be worse with the talent that USC did have last year? USC can push for a playoff spot. They can push for, I don't know if they make one. I said they can push for one. I was talking about Oklahoma earlier. I don't think Oklahoma can make a playoff spot, but could they push for one? Possibly. Yes. Miami, I think, falls into that category. I think they can push for a playoff spot. Do I think they can make one? That's difficult. I might need to see a couple things before I could get on board with that proposition. But keep an eye on USC, one of the most interesting recruiting teams in the country, along with Alabama and Kalen DeBoer. He's been knocking it out of the park so far, and USC's 2025 class currently sits 17th nationally. Lincoln Riley should be able to recruit in the top 10 every year at USC. That should be a standard. They can still get back there. You lose a couple of 5-star kids, that's going to hurt your class ranking. But there is a lot of time to rebuild that class. I'm curious to see how things go. Here's something I was curious about. Do you know the name Antoine Hill? Well, you should, because he was previously the top unranked, or it's not unranked, he was the top ranked uncommitted blue chip quarterback prospect in the class of 2025. Let me give you a list of schools here that were after him and were the schools most notably in pursuit. Alabama, Duke, Florida, North Carolina, Memphis was in there, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Where do you think he went? Where do you think he went? If you're watching on YouTube, you probably know by now, or if you were listening to the show earlier, you know the answer, the answer is Memphis. He went to Memphis. So Ryan Silverfield has done a really nice job with this program and has set them up as the preseason favorites in the American Athletic Conference and a bona fide college football playoff contender. Here's a crazy take that actually isn't crazy and is fairly logical if you understand how this whole process works. Memphis has an easier path to the playoff and a more likely chance of making the playoff than USC. Go look at USC's schedule. It's brutal. You can say the same thing between Memphis and Oklahoma. Is that right? No, I don't think so. That's why I think auto bids are completely ridiculous. I'm not in favor of just shutting the G5 out of the playoff and say you should never have access or a chance to get there. I just don't think you should automatically get a team in, because that team is not going to be nearly as good as a bunch of teams that will miss the playoff. If Oklahoma goes 9-3 and they miss the playoff and they were to play let's say a 10-3 Memphis team that wins the AAC and is the highest ranked conference champion, who do you think is winning that football game? Who do you think? If both teams go 9-3 in their regular seasons, who has accomplished more, Oklahoma or Memphis? The answer is Oklahoma. It's not even a fair comparison at that point. But I want to bring this back to Ryan Silverfield here, because the fact that he has landed Antoine Hill amongst those heavy hitters, I think speaks volumes to what he is building for the Tigers right now and where they are at and where they expect to continue to be going. I don't know that it says anything about their future conference alignment or anything of the sort. I just found it supremely notable that this guy who's considering SEC schools and ACC schools wound up at an American Athletic Conference school. We'll see if he stays committed. I bet those other schools will keep the full court press on him the entire way. Just like with Juju Lewis, who's committed to USC right now. These are verbal commitments. No one has signed a national letter of intent. But Memphis being there, however long the G5 gets an auto bid to the playoff, someone's got to take it. I talk about it all the time here on the show because I don't want people to forget. I don't want you to see a team get in and go, wait a minute, why do they have a playoff spot? I'm trying to avoid that potentially unfortunate situation as best I can. And yeah, this is a 2025 player, not 2024. I'm saying that this commitment, if it holds, speaks volumes to what Ryan Silverfield could be building in Memphis right now. Just keep an eye on it, would you? Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.